Hey guys, it's Sean with version 2 Poker. I'm here with a video recorded by one of my students, Sam. He plays on Poker Stars. I believe he kind of goes back and forth between 10nl and 25nl. But this video appears to be all 25nl tables. Basically, I'm just going to go through it and do a bit of a Leakfinder, see if there's any spots where maybe Sam could improve his bet sizing or the lines he takes, or maybe he's choosing incorrect preflop ranges, or maybe he's playing perfectly. We don't know yet. I haven't viewed the video. Uh, so before we start, I guess I will just bring his HUD into view. So top line, VPIP, PFR, 3-bet, and fold to 3-bet. And second line, C-bet, turn C-bet, fold to C-bet, and steal. Pretty basic HUD, but it seems like a pretty good one. The only thing in there that I would probably add as just a default is fold to steal, because that'll really help you understand how widely you can open the button, depending on who's in the blinds. But yeah, without further ado, I guess I'm just going to click play. Sam recorded about half an hour worth of play. This will probably take me 1 to 2 hours to get through, so it may end up being a two-parter. It looks like on table 3, we're just c-betting with an overpair. Looks pretty fine. If we were to get check raised, I think without history, it'd be a pretty easy fold. And when Villain calls us, he appears to be an unknown. So, but he's 20-20 over 5 hands. We don't know a ton about him. He has a full stack. We should just kind of assume that he's a reg and play accordingly. On the turn, it seems unlikely that he can call us again with worse, given that he's a reg. So if we're betting the turn here, it's because we're turning our hand into a bluff, which I think is fine because it's really, really hard for a guy to call 3 streets with pocket tens on that board. So just 3-barreling there would be pretty reasonable. On the flop, it's clearly for value, but on that turn, I think once you bet again, you start turning your hand into a bluff. Okay, and let's see. As we look around the tables, I'm just going to kind of look at the HUD stats of some of these players. Looks like on table 1 to our immediate left is a pretty big fish, 73-36. Given that he's that aggressive and has position on us, we're going to have to play relatively tight at this table because he's probably going to be putting us in a lot of awkward spots, going to be putting us to a lot of aggression. So we're going to need hands that can flop well, top pair, and then we just get all the money in. Let's see. Also on that table, we've got a couple guys that looks like regs, and then on the bottom right side of that table, we have a 25/4. So clearly some type of passive fish. We just open ace-9 offsuit in the cutoff. This is exactly the type of hand that we could be opening in the cutoff if the button was a tight regular. But I think when you have somebody who's going to be in pots a lot and be playing them, most likely he's going to be playing them relatively aggressively. He's also going to be 3-betting us often. This is a hand that I would be folding from the cutoff, and I would just be playing a much, much stronger range. I know ace-9 off can flop top pair, with the ace, but it's always going to be top pair weak kicker, and if you flop top pair with the 9, you don't really know how much money you want to go in until you know more about the guy. If he's playing really crazy post flop, then maybe you want to ship all the money in on a 9 high flop. But even really, really aggro guys, it's going to be really tough if you just flop a pair of 9s or a pair of aces to know how to properly play the hand. So I would just be staying out of spots like that. Um, let's see. And yeah, we flop top pair, we see bet. That's obviously correct. And he folds, so that works out not too shabby. Let's see, on table 2, by the way, upper left is table 1, upper right table 2, bottom left table 3, bottom right table 4. On table 2, I'm taking a look at, it looks like the guy who's on the button right now is Gator, or something like that. Appears to be a pretty big fish. He's 40/15 over a small sample, so he's likely the target at the table. Table 3, let's see. Table 3 looks like we either have a fish or a short stacker, and the guy who just shoved all in, Lysemi. And looks like we have direct, almost a Jesus seed on a 33/11, so that's not a bad table. Table 4, I'll pause it real quick before I continue because we just got raised on this turn. Table 4 looks like we have one fish with a half a stack, less than a half a stack, 33/11. And then we have direct position on antlers, who may or may not be a fish. We don't have enough hands, only 9 hands. So overall, the tables look okay. I think that when you're playing at PokerStars or Party Poker or any of these sites that are really, really big, and you can table select really easily, especially if you're playing 4 or 6 tables, um, probably there's better tables to be had. In fact, for most of these, except for possibly table 4, 3 and 4, those appear to be pretty good tables. But on PokerStars, you can always find some table where you have direct position on some type of fish. And yes, having any fish at your table is probably going to make you plus EV if you're a good player. But if you can find better tables, there's no reason not to, because it only takes a couple seconds to click through the lobby and find, and just take, sit down at a bunch of tables until you find one where you have direct position on a fish. I'm going to back up this hand on table 2 and see what happened on the flop, because I missed it. Okay. Oops. Alright, so we do c-bet, which is obviously pretty standard. Board's very dry. We have a lot of cards that we can barrel. Spades, 9s, kings, queens, 10s. Some of those for value, some of those for bluff, obviously. So he does call us, and it's a pretty mandatory barrel. A fish on the flop could possibly call us with some ace highs, some pocket 6s, king queens, king 10s, just a bunch of floats that could possibly call us on the flop, and then some middling pairs, like under a jack, that'll fold on the turn. And we pick up some equity, which makes it, a pretty mandatory barrel. And then we get min raised here, and this kind of sucks because we don't know anything about this fish. I'm assuming he's a fish just based on the fact he's 50-0 after 4 hands and he's min raising a turn bet. It's pretty unlikely that a reg would min raise a turn bet here very often at all. Although it could possibly be a good play in some I don't know, very few amount of times it could possibly be a good play. But he min raises a turn. His range is kind of murky at this point because we know so little about him. It could be a jack that is finding out where it's at. It could be quad 3s or pocket 2s or pocket jacks. Could be pocket aces. It kind of a wide range. It's unlikely to be a bluff when he min raises a turn, but it's a kind of strong range. But I don't think he has all that many full houses in his range. And I guess his most likely value hand is just a hand like ace 3 or king 3. So given that he min raises and there's $12 in the pot, it's going to cost us under $3 to call. Pretty mandatory call. And I would just be donking rivers when I improve, as opposed to checking and hoping that he bets again. So if he was very, very passive, we could possibly find a fold on the interesting river. If he was very, very passive, we could possibly find a fold on the turn, just because his range would contain too many full houses and there'd be some kind of reverse implied odds there. But given that it's a min raise and we don't know much about it, I think pretty easy call. Yeah, the river's interesting. It actually doesn't change much about our hand strength. We do pick up top pair, but versus most players, when they min raise the turn, they're repping a range that is stronger than one pair. And if he had like min raised the turn with, I don't know, a jack 10 or a pocket 7s to kind of protect / find out where he's at, I think that on this river he will check it back 90% of the time. So if he bets this river again, anything larger than maybe say a third pot, I'm probably just going to go ahead and fold. If he did bet a third pot, I would think that he would have enough just kind of like random jack X's that we're betting for no real clear reason, because he doesn't have a real clear thought process. So he does check back, and it looks like we win. And he did have king jack, and that's kind of what we expect when he checks back. He's going to have 7s or jack X that can't value bet the river. So on the turn, it's hard to get inside of a fish's thought process some of the time, but on the turn, I imagine it's a combination of him finding out where he's at as well as protecting. He thinks he has the best hand, but he doesn't want you to bet the river really big. He doesn't want it to be an ace. He doesn't want it to be a spade on the river. So he's just kind of like min raising to see if you have a really strong hand, and kind of protect versus bad river cards. So I think Sam played that hand pretty well. Back it up just a bit. We choose on table 2. We choose to c-bet this board, and I actually think versus a guy that looks kind of like a fish, I'd probably just check fold. I feel like we get floated really often here, and we're going to be really unsure as to whether or not barreling on any turn card is correct. Yeah, and now he checks. He checks an ace, which I think is fine because our villain does have a lot of ace X in his flop floating range. So an ace would probably be one of the worst cards to barrel on, even though technically it's a scare card. It's not really. I mean, he kind of expects you to bet the ace. He's not folding any hand that called the flop more than likely. So yeah, I think his check on the turn is fine. Now we bank a river king after he's checked back, and I would actually make a small value bet on the river, but you have to make it small enough that he can call you with 9x or pocket eights or anything like that. So I'd probably go something like 1/3 pot, definitely under half pot, and just try to make it some size that he can't possibly fold. And also, when you're value betting this river, you should expect that villain will have a fair bit of ace X's that like call the flop and then check back the turn. So if you value bet this river small and he snap calls you with ace 5, don't feel like you did anything wrong. He's still gonna, I mean, he definitely have ace X's in his range, but he's still gonna call you when you bet small with 9s and 9x's, 7x's, pocket eights, things like that. So let's see what happens here. Oh, it looks like we check over to him on the river. Okay, so yeah, I definitely would have value bet the river, and I would have bet small. But I think as played, it's a pretty clear fold. Calling the flop and checking back the turn and betting the river without history against a villain, you can kind of assume it's rarely a bluff. And if he had like 10-8 or 6-8, we would expect that to bet the turn most of the time. And he's not, like, it doesn't make any sense for him to call the flop with a 9 and then have like 2 of the scarier cards in the deck or 2 of the big cards in the deck, and then him to like bomb the river, 3/4 pot here with a 9. So I think he's repping somewhat polarized here to like ace X or better and busted draws. And I think given that most of his draws would probably just bet the turn when we check to him, it's a pretty clear fold. That said, I still would have value bet the turn or the river. I'm not sure what happened. Looks like we did fold, but the video lagged out for a second. Okay. So the smart M89 limps under the gun. I'm immediately going to color code him whatever my color for a fish is. I mean, he's limping. I just automatically assume he's a fish. Jack 10 suited, I think, is fine raised, isolate out of position. It would be one of the worst hands I would raise. I would probably raise 9-10 suited versus an unknown but assumed fish. I would raise ace 10 offsuit, queen jack offsuit, jack 10 offsuit, probably not 8-9 suited. So yeah, that's what my range. Probably like pocket sevens plus. When you start to find out more about some of these limpers, if they have high fold to C bets, you can be isolating out of position more often with a wider range because you're just going to pick it up on the flop with your C bet so often. Let's see, and then on table 3, looks like we isolated. It looks like we isolated a limper, and we get a pretty dry flop and pretty standard C bet here, and probably only barreling on like an ace or a 10 or a queen or a jack. Yeah. Back to table 2, we see bet the flop. We do get called. Turn's kind of a scary card because not scary like to us, but it's a scare card. I definitely would just value bet again. He could possibly call us again with 7s or 8s or 9s, although a lot of those go into the muck. But he definitely will call us again with flush draws and ace 5s and worse 10x's and things like that. Yeah, so I would barrel again. And if we check like Sam does here, actually puts us kind of a rough spot. One, we miss value from our draws. And two, or excuse me, we miss value from his draws. He gets to just check back and take the free card, which makes his flop call with draws correct because he gets two cards to draw at it instead of one. And two, we're in the spot where, especially versus an unknown villain, now we're like checking and we're checking like to decide, and it's never good giving up the betting lead because their range is like not well defined, and you don't know how often he's going to bet rivers and things like that. So it puts you in kind of tough spots. So I think it's a pretty clear value bet on the turn. When the guy checks back the turn and we get the river, I think again I would put out a small value bet. Try to get called by some weak hands. Let's go back to table 3 and see what happened. Oh, okay. I see. This guy has an awkward stack size, so we opt to check back. I think that's fine. If this guy had a full stack, I would go ahead and value bet the turn again. But on this particular turn, with this guy's particular stack size, it's kind of a rough spot because we don't really want to be like over bet jamming, and we also don't want to be bet calling or bet folding for $4. So I think, given the awkwardness of this guy's stack size, a check back is fine. And then just kind of play a river. Oh shoot, VLC went away. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. VLC is having some weird type of issues. Okay, so we're back on this river. This is actually pretty terrible run out for us. Yeah, on the Ace River, like we just lose to so much, and given his river leading size, it's definitely easy for him to have an ace, like an ace X of hearts, an ace 7, and ace 5, and he definitely could be leading the size with a king because he's scared of the ace, and he wants to set his own price. He wants to bet half pot. He doesn't want you to bet full pot, things like that. Um, so yeah, as played, I think River's a fold. He's just not going to have enough busted draws with this sizing. I think if he was going to have a busted draw really often, he would bet a much larger size or a much smaller size. I don't think this little half pot bet is a bluff. I think it's really often just a blocking bet with a king and then sometimes some type of weak ace. Alrighty. So yeah, so a couple spots where we missed some possibly thin value versus some fish, and that was really interesting. I'll back it up just so you guys see it. Hopefully it pops up again. Villain on table 2 in that hand where we had Jack 10, he checks down. I'll pause it. He floats the flop with ace 9 and then checks down. So this is a guy against whom, when he like if we have some type of marginal hand and he decides to bet, it's just going to be a much easier fold than against a lot of other somewhat unknown fishes, because he chooses to float with basically air and then completely check down when he misses. And it could be the case that he got scared of this king or something like that, but I think that's unlikely. I think he's more likely just going to end up being really passive, even with his busted draws and things like that. Bottom right table, we choose not to isolate with 7-8 offsuit. I think that's a pretty good choice here. We don't know much about this villain, and we do have two apparently fishy guys in the blind, so we're just going to go multi-way really often with a really terrible hand. If it was two nitty guys in the blinds, and we knew more about this fish, i.e. he was passive, as opposed to some type of aggro fish, I think we could easily isolate 7-8 offsuit from the button. But in this spot, I like the fold. We fold 7-8 suited from the cutoff. Again, I like it just because we have some fishy guys behind us with short stacks. On table 2, we're getting a bunch of interesting spots up here. It's a board where, given how passive our villain is, it's pretty likely that like we could just check down and he's not going to stab at it very often. And so that's a reasonable line to take, is just to kind of check down, because it's hard for him to fold. Like, he's not going to fold any better when we bet the flop, and he's not going to call with any worse. or any super worse hands. But one of the problems is that like if we just start checking down here, our hand's really vulnerable. Any king, queen, or jack can ruin our hand. So I would likely just c-bet here and then check down after that. So he can call us on the flop with some flush draws, with some king queens and some queen jacks, which are all about a flip with us. But it allows us just to continue to check. Like we get one street of value, and then we can kind of expect him not to bet his busted draws on the river, given the way he played that ace nine. So I would c-bet once, and if he ends up folding a hand like king eight, that's not a terrible result for us. This board is not great for pocket nine. So if he just folds, it's actually a pretty good result. And the guy donks for more than pot. It's pretty clear fold. I don't know what his bet size means per se, but I think a lot of times on boards that appear relatively drawy to fish, that had an ace and ace 10 with two diamonds, I think sometimes the fish will overpot the flop with just like a top pair type hand because they're really scared. Like sometimes these fish, they're just deathly afraid of draws hitting, and so he's really worried. He could have an ace x type hand. It's possible he has like two pair, but unlikely. They tend to try to trap with those. So most likely he has some type of like ace x type hand, and he's deathly afraid of the board running out bad. And so then you might say, well, if he's really afraid of it, let's float, and if a diamond hits, let's bluff. And there's a couple flaws with that theory. One, a diamond's only hit 20% of the time on the turn. And two, he's not folding. So even though he's deathly afraid of the flush, he's still not folding it. He's still not folding top pair most of the time. So yeah, pretty trivial fold and correctly done by Sam. So let's speed it up a little bit, see if we can find some interesting spots. Oh, and it looks like I just restarted it, not sped it up. Okay, let me find our spot again. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure. They used to have a speed up button in this, but I don't know where it went to. It looks like I'm not 100% sure because I've been using Poker Tracker 4 because the site I'm on, you have to use Poker Tracker. But it looks like we've upgraded to Hold'em Manager 2, or Sam has. And if you guys haven't upgraded to it, I think you should. It's definitely an improvement over Hold'em Manager 1. It has a lot of cool filters that like just designed and put into the program that weren't in Hold'em Manager 1. And there's also the way the pop-ups work, the way you can design pop-ups and things like that, much better than they were in Hold'em Manager 1. So definitely upgrade if you guys get a chance. I'm pretty sure, and I'm not trying to like plug Hold'em Manager too much, but I think they have a discount. Like if you bought Hold'em Manager within like the last 2 years, they'll give you some type of discount on Hold'em Manager 2 based on how long ago you bought Hold'em Manager 1. Okay, we make a pretty easy 3-bet here with ace king versus the fish who insta snap calls, which doesn't tell us a whole lot because we assume he's calling with everything he chose to min raise with. And I would go ahead and just c-bet this flop. We have some backdoor equity. We have two overs, and he definitely could just fold a hand like pocket sixes or ace jack or something like that. And if you're saying to yourself, why do I want him to fold ace jack? The reason is, even though ace jack is a worse hand than ours, if we check and he has ace jack, he's probably just going to win the pot because he's going to bet, and we can't really call, we can't check call the flop. On the turn, we pick up some equity. Now we have two overs and a gut shot, but Sam decides to check, and I think that's correct. When villain calls the flop, he's going to have a wide variety of hands that are like 8x and better. He's mostly going to fold his hands like pocket twos, threes, fives, sixes, sevens. He's going to fold all those almost every time. But when he calls the flop, he's going to have a lot of 8x's, maybe like an 8-9 suited, 7-8 suited, ace-8 suited, stuff like that. Definitely can have some queen x's in his range. An 8x could possibly fold to a turn barrel, but not if it's a hand like 10-8 or 8-9 because now it's picked up a gut shot. If he had 9-10, he just made the nuts. If he had Jack-10, he now has a pair. He's certainly not folding. And if he had a queen, he's not, or queen or a flush draw, he's definitely not folding. So there's just very, very few hands that call flop and fold turn here. And if we're lucky, and it could happen relatively often, if he has some type of weak 10, or excuse me, weak queen, or a hand like Jack-10 or 8-9, he's going to check back the turn pretty often, and then we'll get to realize some of our equity for free. And if he bets here any sizable amount, we just have to check fold. Unless if he makes it like $1, obviously we call with our equity. Our villain does opt to check back, and I would just continue to check fold here. I think he's connected to the board in some way most of the time. And wow, super passive again. So one thing we've noticed is that our villain is not folding ace highs to c-bets, and that he's extremely passive with them. Again, that's twice now. He's just floated a flop with ace high, check down, unimproved. Yeah, so there's a lot to learn from that. Like anytime this guy bets, he just has a strong hand. We have no tough decisions whatsoever when the guy bets. Right? Like if he bets, he just has top pair plus, and we get to make pretty easy folds. Whereas some fish, like you get in these spots and you're like, man, would he bet a busted draw? Would he do this? Would he do that? How wide is he here? This guy, you can be pretty certain he just has it. Which means that even with us being out of position, it's going to be relatively easy to play. Sorry about those pop-ups. I guess I had some tables open from my session earlier today. So one thing you can see, and I know the little notepad that he's typing in goes off the recording screen just a little bit, but you can see that Sam's typing in some notes here, and he's just kind of like writing it out in words. And one thing I would suggest is coming up with some type of shorthand for taking notes that would make it easier to, one, to type, and two, to read. Because when you try to pull up this notepad and you have to read through all of this text, it's really difficult to like gain any information out of that quickly. So one, I would come up with some type of shorthand, and once you have a few reads on a guy and like you see him do a couple things, like this guy, we saw him float with ace high twice and then completely check down unimproved on turns and rivers, once in a 3-bet pot and once in a regular pot. Instead of writing down the hand history the way that it's happening here, I would consolidate that into some type of read. Like floats wide, extremely passive, like floats wide, checks down with air, extremely passive post flop, things like that, as opposed to having the hand history. However, when you're first getting to know a guy, the only thing you have is hand histories. So like in this case, he's writing down call 3-bet in position, ace-10 suited, call c-bet with air, and then check down. That's what he's going to write. So the way I would write this, and you can come up with your own shorthand, but I would write this flat, 3-bet in position, call, check down, ace, high. All right, and it's just a little bit easier. Or you can even like just call check down air, and you just you don't have to write out the whole like verbiage of exactly what happened, because it's a bit tough to read. So come up with shorthands. Like if he check raised, I would just say like check raise, all right, instead of check to flop and then raised my c-bet after I bet the flop, right? I know that's a little extreme, but that's some of the type of stuff I see people taking notes like, and it's just impossible to gain information of that quickly. Table 3, we're in the blinds. The guy who appears to be pretty passive, fishy, opens. Pretty obvious set mine here. He likely has a strong range. Yeah, okay, this is a clear mistake, folding those pocket sixes. The guy appears to be fishy. Anytime a fish is in a pot and you can get him somewhat cheaply, always set mine. It's just always going to be profitable. I'm not a big fan of folding pocket sixes to any open raise ever, but if you do fold it, it's generally going to be versus good regs who raise on the button, and you're in the blinds, and then the range is wide, so you're not going to be able to like stack them when you flop a set very often. But even then, I'm calling with pocket sixes the vast majority of the time. I have a database of well over 1 million hands, and they've been profitable for me flatting out of position versus button opens. That said, if you want to fold them because you're uncomfortable playing them, I think it's okay. I don't think it's, I don't think you're missing a huge amount of value by folding them versus button opens. But when it's a guy who appears to be a fish, especially a guy who appears to be a passive fish, um, which means that like when he raises preflop, his range is likely to be pretty strong. I think folding them is a pretty clear mistake. So yeah, missed opportunity there. For that same reason, when this guy opens, I'd be folding a good, good amount of hands that I would be flatting versus, regular, say like a king jack suited or an ace jack offsuit. Those hands, when this guy opens the button, I'm just going to go ahead and fold because he has a pretty strong range. And we fold pocket sevens to a 3-bet pretty standard on table 1. Good fold. Okay, and then we choose to 3-bet 5-6 off on the button here. I don't think it's a terrible spot to 3-bet. I just don't like our hand choice for it. I think we can't be 3-betting all of the time, and if we start 3-betting 5-6 offsuit as part of our range for 3-betting, then we're going to be 3-betting way too often, or we're going to have to be dumping hands that are much, much better for 3-betting. Again, I don't think this is a huge mistake, but I think when you're choosing to 3-bet on the button, you should have some type of general range, and that generally should come from the top of your folding range. Hands like if you didn't feel comfortable flatting king jack offsuit here, then you could turn that into a 3-bet bluff. King 10 suited, ace 6 suited, 7-8 suited, 5-6 suited. Lots of suited hands, lots of offsuit broadways. Those are the types of hands you should be 3-betting. And I mean the reason being that those hands play somewhat well post flop. We do expect people mostly to fold or 4-bet to our 3-bet. However, they do flat a fair bit, and having some post-flop playability as well as having an established range for yourself so that you know what to look for. Like every time you get dealt a7 suited on the button, before anything happens, you already know that this is a spot where you're sometimes going to be 3-betting. So it just makes it a lot easier to recognize spots where you could be 3-betting. As well as that post-flop playability. If we have a hand like 5-6 offsuit, we kind of just like flop bottom pairs and occasionally open enders. And we don't have a whole lot of equity most of the time. But if we 3-bet a hand like 5-6 suited, really often, one, being able to make a flush in a 3-bet pot, huge advantage, right? Because that's a very strong hand and we can stack top pairs and 2 pairs and things like that. But also the ability to like turn flush draws, to turn equity and to continue barreling on them. So the fact that with 5-6 suited, I could, the flop could come ace 7 2, right? And I would c-bet, and if he check called, I could, let's make it king 7 2. It's king 7 2 and rainbow. With 5-6 off, the only turn cards I can barrel are 8s and 4s that give me equity. But with 5-6 suited, I can barrel 8s and 4s and hearts. Right now, so now I just have a significantly larger number of turns that I can barrel with equity. Makes a pretty big difference. And then when you combine that with the fact of actually making the flush and stacking people somewhat often, or much more often than with a straight, yeah, I think it makes a big difference. So, but villain does fold, and that's good. I think what may have happened on table 3 is Sam just got a little bit itchy to 3-bet because he hadn't 3-bet yet. And so he just kind of picked the spot because he was on the button and the other guy was in the cutoff, which is a fine spot to be 3-betting often. I would just, like I said, I think that there's definitely much, much better hands. Let's skip forward a little bit, see if we can get some action going. Back it up, went too fast. All right, so table 1, we open on the cutoff, ace queen off. We get flatted by our pretty aggro fishy guy. Good news, we flop top pair. This is a spot where we c-bet $1.25, which has been our standard c-bet size everywhere. However, this is a spot where we're basically not bluffing. We're either semi-bluffing or value betting because of the opponent in the hand and also with the board texture. So in spots where you're just like not bluffing very often, there's a reason you're not bluffing often. It's because you get called really often and you need a strong hand to go up against it. So if you're getting called really often and you're never bluffing, then you should be betting bigger. It's kind of like a simple way to put it. Another way to look at it is he's pretty fishy. If he has a straight draw or a pair, he's not folding no matter how big we bet. And there's a lot of straight draws and pairs to be had on this, and flush draws as well. So yeah, definitely I would deviate from our standard c bet size here and up my size to at least $1.35 or $1.50, and just bomb it. Turn, not a particularly great turn because it does complete the flush. However, it also improves a lot of his hands to include draws now. So if he had a 10, king 10 with the king of spades, he's never folding the turn now. Whereas it's possible that he would have folded the turn if we double barreled on a brick turn. If he had a hand like 8-9, he's now calling the turn. If he had an ace with a 2 of spades, he's now calling the turn. Although that probably called the turn anyway. But Jack 10 offsuit now picks up a gut shot. So yeah, so there's a lot of hands. Yeah, it completes a flush, but there are a ton of hands that just picked up some equity but are still well behind us. So it's a good spot to double barrel. And again, I would go relatively large, something like $3. We go 275. I would have opted a bit larger, but I think a fine bet size. And when we get raised, not much to do but fold. Generally, if you're familiar with Beluga theorem, when they raise the turn, they just have the goods. There's not much to it. This guy is a bit more aggro, so it's possible that he could be raising the turn with some type of bluff. But on this particular, like on this board texture, there's not a whole lot that he could float the flop with that doesn't have something by the turn. In other words, he doesn't, like, what air does he have? King, queen, offsuit, with no spade. That's about it. And there's just not that many of those. He has way more hands with like an 8-9 that has now a pair on the turn that's not going to bluff raise us. A pair of aces, a 10x. All those hands aren't going to bluff raise us on the turn. They're just going to call again or fold. So when he raises on the turn, we can be pretty certain he just has a really strong hand, possibly a jack 9 or a flush. Yeah, another spot, pocket 5, same. I'm not going to rehash it, but same villain opens and we fold a small pocket pair again. A pretty clear flat. And table 2, it looks like our villain checked the flop, and Sam thought about leading the turn briefly. And I think it's actually a fine spot to lead. It's just a spot where we have to, if we bet turn, we need to follow through on the river, on most rivers, because he will call the turn with ace highs, but he can fold the river with them. He'll also call it with 9-10s and queen 10s and 7-8 of diamonds, all those hands that we would lose to if it checks through on the river. So yeah, I think leading the turn's a pretty decent spot. The board doesn't change much, and he didn't bet the flop. So he somewhat unlikely as a pair. Although this guy is really passive, it's possible he could check with like a jack or a 5, but most of his range is total air, so I would just bet the turn and then expect him to call relatively often, fold sometimes, call often, and then I would just follow through on the river with a bet. I would actually value bet the river a quarter here. Yeah, he gets 35 cents, that's fine. Yeah, good value bet on the river there. All right, so we have ace king in the small blind here, and I'm not sure, I paused it, so I'm not sure what Sam's going to do here, but I think a lot of people are tempted to flat because we don't want to drive this fish out of the pot. And there's a couple things that make me disagree with that. One, flatting, ace king out of position in a three-handed pot without the betting lead, it's actually not the greatest situation in the world. Yes, we would allow him into the pot more often, but it's not like just going multi-way out of position with an offsuit ace king, really not super great. Also, if we 3-bet here, there's actually, this guy's 71 VPIP so far. There's a pretty darn good chance he's just going to cold call the 3-bet anyway with any two pretty cards. And if everyone folds, right, we still pick up a lot of money pre-flop, and that's actually a really, really good result. If we flat and it goes three-handed to the flop, we're just going to miss the flop 2/3 of the time, check fold. Whereas if we 3-bet here, we can win it pre-flop, or we can get one or both of these villains to call when our hand is really, really strong. I definitely think just 3-betting is better than flatting here. The reasons to flat here, and it looks like he is going to 3-bet, so I'm happy. If we thought our villain was extremely aggressive pre-flop, like he was 3-betting like 20% or something like that over a relatively large sample, and we were trying to trap his 3-bet, so we were going for some type of back 4-bet, I would like flatting better than 3-betting, but I think 90% of the time we should just be 3-betting. And we see bet a pretty dry board, looks pretty good. He's going to fold a lot of 6s, 7s, ace jacks, things like that on table 1. So well played. Table 3, we open king jack suited, middle position. We get 3-bet by the cutoff. Pretty standard fold versus just about anyone, but versus a nit over 250 hands makes it a very easy fold. And I like, on table 1, I actually do like this 3-bet. This guy appears to be somewhat nitty, but it's only 66 hands, and he is opening on the button. So I think his 3-bet is a good choice of hands, and it's a good spot to 3-bet. I mean, the guy appears to be able to rake opening on the button. And we just go c-bet, just about half pot. It's a fine size. This board's nice. We can double barrel on some spades. And he'll probably just fold really often because he's just going to have queen jacks and 9-10 suiteds and ace queens and things like that that just have to fold. So when he calls us on the flop on table 1, it's possible that he has hands like pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket queens, hands that didn't want to get in pre-flop that might fold to a turn barrel. That said, let's pretend this is not a 10, by the way, because obviously 10 is not folding again. But that said, like if we 2-barrel, would he actually fold those pairs between an 8 and a king every time? And the answer is no. He's going to fold them quite often, but not every time. And when you just think about it combinatorically, and if you guys aren't familiar with combinatorics, look it up on 2+2. It's important. I know most of you are, but if you're not, definitely look it up. But combinatorically, like just the amount of like king queen offsuits and king jack offsuits that he can have pre-flop vastly outweigh the amount of pocket 9s, 10s, jacks, and queens that he can have pre-flop, even when there's a king on the board and we know where it is. So without equity here, I think it's a pretty clear check fold. And he'll often check it back, but even when he checks it back, we can't now bluff the river. He won't fold anything then. On table 2, looks like we open ace-8 suited, we get called by our friendly fish. And villain did tank for a long time and fold, and it makes me think that he did end up folding a hand like pocket jacks. However, I don't think he folds that every time, and I think just like I said, there's just way too many kings in his range that way outcompensate the like pocket jacks. Now, if we had some history with him and we thought that he was floating this flop with ace highs a lot, or just in general just floating the flop, turn barrel makes more sense. But in this spot, I don't like it, and it does end up working out. So that's an okay result. On table 2, not a great flop, but our friendly fish is super, super wide. We know that he calls flop super, super wide. He'll probably call the flop bet with literally any heart in his hand. So my plan for this flop would be to bet the flop and bet the turn and check fold the river. Because remember, we said he's really, really passive. So we don't expect him to bluff us. And we probably don't even expect him to value bet like hands like 2-pair if he calls 2 streets with them. He's probably just going to check it back on the river given how passive he is. So yeah, I would definitely bet flop and turn for value unless there was a heart on the turn, fold to a raise at any given point, and bet flop and turn and fold river. Went internet browsing for a minute. Sam did. Um, Looks like Sam on table 4. Looks like we completed from the small blind. We flopped a flush draw, and we go ahead and lead, which I think is correct. And then we go three-handed to a turn, and it looks like we're going to check, which I think is fine. Had we gone heads up to a turn, I would double barrel. But three-handed to a turn, it's pretty tough to get through. Someone's very likely to have a jack. So pretty easy turn call given the size of the bet. I think I bet 1/4 pot and we had a caller, so we get to overcall, getting super good odds. And now we're just going to check fold the river. So in this hand, this guy leads small on the turn and the river and snap folds to a raise. I would definitely be taking a note that he's capable of block bet folding. There's a lot of fish that are not, and having that read is really, really important because they're often, fish are donking into us really often. And if he uses that small sizing and we were debating between raising or not raising and we weren't sure if he was going to fold, obviously that note's going to make a huge difference because now we're just going to raise him on the river and he's going to snap fold his weak hands. All right, well, I guess it's actually a pretty decent spot to pause it. Overall, I think Sam played well. I think there was a couple spots where he missed value, and there was that one double barrel that I wasn't particularly thrilled about in the 3-bet pot. Overall, I think he played well. I just think we missed, like I said, missed a few value spots. Definitely missed some spots where we could have flatted versus a pretty fishy guy in set mind. Um, but overall, I think definitely a plus EV game. And so I'm just going to pause the video now. We're about 16 minutes in. We have about 16 minutes left in his gameplay. So that'll make for one more 45 to 50 minute video. So I will see you guys next time.